When you're asked to multiply positives and negatives together, the rules are simple. A positive times a positive is a positive. For example, positive 8 times positive 2 equals positive 16. A positive times a negative is a negative. For example, positive 8 times negative 2 equals negative 16. A negative times a positive is a negative. Negative 8 times positive 2 equals negative 16. And then a negative times a negative is a positive. For example, negative 8 times negative 2 equals positive 16. The rules for division of positives and negatives are the same as the rules for multiplication of positives and negatives. For example, a positive divided by a positive is a positive. For example, positive 8 divided by positive 2 equals positive 4. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. Positive 8 divided by negative 2 equals negative 4. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. Negative 8 divided by positive 2 equals negative 4. And then a negative divided by a negative is a positive. For example, negative 8 divided by negative 2 equals positive 4. Alright, now that we have gone through the rules of multiplying and dividing positives and negatives, let's jump into some examples. So let's start with our first example here. How about we pick an easy one that we can do? Let's start with, say, negative 5 times positive 8. Alright, so how do we simplify this? Well, there's two ways that we can think about it. Either we can go back to our rules, which are at the beginning of the video, if you want to either take a screenshot of that, or just memorize them, or the way I like to remember it is that if the signs are different, no matter if we're multiplying or dividing, our answer will be negative. So since 8 times 5 is 40, we just have to worry about what our sign is going to be. Well, since the signs are different in this case, we know that our product will be negative. So a negative times a positive always will yield in a negative. So negative 5 times positive 8 will give us an answer of negative 40. Alright, in this problem we're faced with a division simplification problem. So, like I said, there are two ways that we can think about it. Either we can go back to our rules and note that a negative divided by a negative always will equal a positive, or if the signs are the same, our division, or if the signs are the same, our quotient will be positive. So, in this case, negative 45 divided by negative 9 is going to simplify to positive 5. Because a negative divided by a negative always yields in a positive. Alright, in this problem we have positive 24 divided by negative 3. Now since a positive times a negative always will yield in a negative, positive 24 times negative 3 is going to give us an answer of negative 72. Easy enough. Alright, in this problem we have 3x times negative 4. Now don't get thrown off just because a variable like x is introduced in a problem that involves the multiplication and division of positives and negatives. Our rules are going to be the exact same. Since a positive times a negative is always going to yield in a negative, positive 3x times negative 4 is going to equal negative 12x. So the x just comes along for the ride in our problem. Alright, in this problem we have negative 63x divided by negative 9. Now again, just because a variable like x appears, we're going to treat this the exact same way that we've treated our previous problems. Since a negative divided by a negative is a positive, negative 63x divided by negative 9 will be equal to positive 7x. Now the reason I'm throwing variables in is because Algebra 1 involves basically every unit that we're going to do, we're going to have variables. Variables are really the backbone of Algebra 1. Everything really relies on them. So this is why it's good to introduce them now, because from here on out, besides these basic concepts, we're going to be using variables all the time. For substitution, for systems of equations, everything, for graphing. So this is why it's good to get exposed to them now, because Algebra 1 really relies heavily on variables. Alright, in this problem we have 10x times 10x. Now the temptation is to say right away that the answer is 100x. But remember, 10x times 10 would be equal to 100x, but we have two x's in both of our terms. Sorry, we have one x in each of our terms. We have two terms together. So what's going to be our answer? Well, here's the thing you have to realize. When we're multiplying two x's by each other, we're always going to get x squared. So actually, let me write this at the bottom just so we can remember this. Well, let me just do a little star. I'll say, remember that x times x equals x squared. So x times x will always equal x squared. And the reason this is because it has to do with the laws of exponents, which we'll be talking about later on in the course. Basically, each of these x's is really raised to the power of 1. And when we're multiplying powers with the same base, in this case, oops, let me get rid of that scribble here. When we're multiplying powers with the same base, in this case 10, we multiply the coefficients and we add the exponents. So that's why we get x squared. But all we have to remember now is that x times x equals x squared. So 10x times 10x is going to equal 100 x squared. All right, here we're faced with a little bit of a longer problem involving negatives, positives, multiplication, and x's. So the two key things to understand. First of all, it's very easy to make mistakes when you're dealing with positives and negatives. Even just getting the wrong sign to your answer is still going to be wrong, obviously. So make sure that you're writing your steps out either on paper or digitally in a clear way so you can read what you're solving. And then also, when you're faced with a longer problem involving the multiplication and division of positives and negatives, make sure you work the problem carefully from left to right. So in this case, we're going to deal with negative 7 and negative 4x first. So since a negative times a negative will always yield in a positive, negative 7x times negative 4x is going to equal to positive 28x. But remember, we have two x's. So that's going to equal 28x squared. And then also we have to bring down our negative 2. You can't forget about our negative 2. So now we have a positive times a negative, and remember that a positive times a negative always equals a negative, so positive 28x squared times negative 2 is going to equal negative 56x squared. All right, here we have one more longer problem that involves positives and negatives. So two things to remember. Remember to write out the problem or write out your solution step by step. All right, here we have a little bit of a longer problem again, just so we really get the hang of it. Remember that we want to write out our steps neatly and organized and go step by step through the problem so we don't make any mistakes. And remember, we're going to work the problem from left to right when we're dealing with positives and negatives. So, in this case, we have positive 54x divided by 6. So that's going to be equal to 9x. So we have 9x. I'm bringing down the negative 4 times negative 4 divided by 12. You can see how I brought everything else down in the problem. So now we have 9x times negative 4 divided by 12. Moving from left to right again, 9x times negative 4 is going to equal negative 36x. So we have negative 36x divided by positive 12. Now since a negative divided by positive is going to yield a negative, negative 36x divided by positive 12 is going to equal negative 3x. And that's going to be the solution to our problem. Alright, to finish off the video, I have 4 problems laid out that are some special cases that you will likely encounter throughout this course or in general. So I encourage you guys to either pause the video right now and try to answer them for yourselves, or just follow along with me, and then we'll see what happens here. So first up, in problem A, we have 0 times negative 5. So the important thing to remember is that 0 multiplied by any positive or negative or 0 is always going to equal 0. So in that case, 0 times negative 5 is going to equal 0. Likewise, positive 8 times 0, or any positive or negative number times 0, or 0 times 0, is always going to equal 0. And the reason this is that multiplication follows the commutative property. In other words, we can switch the order of the factors and not change the product. The factors are the numbers that we're multiplying together. So positive 8 times positive 0 is going to equal positive 0. In C down here, we have 0 divided by negative 3. Now 0 divided by any positive or negative will always equal 0. So 0 divided by negative 3 is going to equal 0. Now in the same way, you might think that negative 3 divided by 0 is also going to equal 0, but that's not the case. Whenever you have a number divided by 0, the result is always going to be undefined. Meaning you can't divide by 0. Any positive or negative number divided by 0 will be undefined, and then 0 divided by 0 is also undefined. So you have to remember one important key concept, which is this. You cannot divide by 0. And one way that I like to think about it, that I learned, is that if you think of a fraction bar, which a fraction bar is really division. So if you have, for example, 1/2 the fraction, you're really saying 1 divided by 2. So that's equal to the decimal 0.5, etc. That's just an example. Think of division by 0 as the fraction n over o, saying either a number divided by 0 or saying no, meaning no is you can't divide by 0. This is a way that I like to think about it. If you're ever confused about whether 0 divided by a number is going to equal undefined, or a number divided by 0 is going to equal undefined. So if you think about it as in terms of no, that way you'll realize that any number that you have divided by 0 will always equal undefined. So some examples are 3 over 0 is undefined, 9 over 0 is undefined, and say 58 over 0. All of these are going to equal undefined. So we could just draw an arrow. All these are going to equal undefined. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it really helped you with multiplying and dividing positives and negatives. From here on out, we'll be moving into some other key concepts before we jump into actually Algebra 1. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more content, and I will see you guys in the next video.